Welcome to Sleepy Crimes. I am Anna, your host. Tonight we drift into the shadows of the Pink Panthers. Imagine, if you will, the city of London on a mild Monday in May, in the year 2003. The evening air carries a gentle dampness, a soft mist that clings to the ancient stone of Mayfair. This is a place where wealth is not merely seen, but felt. It is in the quiet hum of expensive tires on cobblestone, the scent of aged mahogany and imported leather drifting from open doorways, and the golden glow of window displays that house the rarest treasures on earth. We are standing on New Bond Street, where the world's most exquisite jewels rest behind layers of reinforced glass, sleeping under the watchful eyes of silent security. Among these temples of luxury stands Graf Diamonds, a name synonymous with unparalleled brilliance. Inside, the atmosphere is hushed, a sanctuary of velvet and light. The floors are polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the soft amber lamps that cast a warm, inviting glow over cases filled with stones that have spent millions of years beneath the Earth's crust, waiting for this moment to shine. It is nearly noon on May 19th. Two men approach the heavy glass doors of the boutique. They are dressed with the understated elegance of successful businessmen, their suits tailored, their movements deliberate and calm. One of them, a man named Nebojsadenik, wears a dark, curly wig, a subtle artifice that softens the sharp lines of his face. He carries himself with a quiet confidence that suggests he belongs in such a place, among the diamonds and the elite. As they are buzzed through the security airlock, the heavy door clicks shut behind them with a definitive metallic sound, sealing out the noise of the London traffic. For a moment, there is only the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick, plush carpet. They ask to see a selection of rings, speaking in low, cultured tones. The staff, trained in the art of discreet service, move with grace to fulfill the request. They have no reason to suspect that the air in this room is about to change, that the stillness is merely the breath held before a storm. In a sudden, jarring shift, the businessman's facade evaporates. Denik reaches into his jacket and pulls out a chrome-plated .357 Magnum. The silver metal glints coldly under the boutique lights, a harsh intrusion of reality into this world of dreams. The heist is a masterpiece of precision, lasting less than 3 minutes. While the staff are forced to the floor, feeling the cool, hard surface against their skin, the thieves work with a clinical efficiency. A hammer strikes the display cases, the sound of shattering glass ringing out like a series of sharp, crystalline bells. Fragments of security glazing spray across the velvet like frozen rain. 47 pieces of jewelry are swept into bags, a fortune in diamonds and gold worth £23 million. The weight of the loot is heavy, a physical manifestation of a lifetime's worth of labor for most, gathered in mere seconds. But as they attempt their escape, the smooth choreography falters. A security guard, fueled by a sudden surge of adrenaline, lunges at Denik. They grapple on the sidewalk of New Bond Street, a desperate struggle of shadows and limbs. In the chaos, the wig is torn away, revealing the man beneath the disguise. Denik is pinned down, his breath coming in ragged gasps against the pavement, while his accomplices vanish into the labyrinthine streets of the West End, carrying the bulk of the treasure with them. They disappear like ghosts into the London fog, leaving behind a city in shock and a trail that seems to lead nowhere. In the weeks that follow, the investigation by Scotland Yard is a slow, methodical peeling back of layers. They follow the whispers of international syndicates, tracing the movements of men who move across borders as easily as shadows cross a room. The trail leads eventually to a quiet apartment in Queen's Gardens, located in the leafy, affluent neighborhood of Bayswater. This is where Milan Jovetic, an accomplice in the robbery, had sought refuge. When the police finally arrive, the atmosphere is mundane, almost domestic. The flat smells of coffee and laundry. It is a stark contrast to the high-stakes violence of the jewelry shop. The detectives move through the rooms, their flashlights cutting through the dim afternoon light, searching through drawers and closets. They find 2 forged Italian passports, their pages crisp and unused. But it is in the bathroom, among the ordinary toiletries of a young woman's daily routine, that they find the most extraordinary clue of all. On a shelf, nestled between bottles of shampoo and tubes of toothpaste, sits a simple, plastic jar of face cream. It is heavy, weighted with something more substantial than cosmetic lotion. A detective unscrews the lid, the faint, floral scent of the white cream drifting upward. He dips a gloved finger into the cool, viscous liquid, feeling for an obstruction. Deep within the white swirl, hidden from the world in a bed of moisturizing lotion, his fingers touch something hard and cold. He pulls it out, and as the cream is wiped away, a brilliant blue light begins to dance in the room. It is a diamond ring, a stone of exceptional clarity and hue, valued at £500,000. The sight is so surreal, so cinematic, that it immediately strikes a chord with the investigators. They are reminded of the 1975 film, The Return of the Pink Panther, where a thief hides a legendary diamond in exactly the same way. In that moment, the anonymous group of Balkan thieves is given a name that will echo through the annals of criminal history. They are no longer just robbers, they are the Pink Panthers. It is a name that suggests a certain theatricality, a blend of cold-blooded professionalism and a strange, playful nod to the silver screen. The discovery of that single stone, buried in a jar of cream, becomes the birth of a legend. The world had never seen a group quite like this. They were veterans of forgotten wars, men who treated a jewelry heist like a military operation, yet possessed a flair for the dramatic that captured the public's imagination. As the blue diamond was recovered, and the name Pink Panthers was splashed across the morning papers, the group was already planning their next move in cities across the globe. But for tonight, we stay here, in the quiet of that Bayswater flat, where the scent of face cream and the glint of a hidden diamond remain etched in memory. The high-speed chases and the smashing of glass are over for now. The streets of London have grown silent, the mist has settled, and the treasures of the world are tucked away behind their heavy steel doors. Let your mind rest on the image of that blue light, softened by the white cream, a secret kept in the most ordinary of places. The heist is a story told in whispers now. You are safe in the stillness of your room. Close your eyes, feel the weight of your blankets, and let the mystery of the Pink Panthers drift away into the dark. Sleep well. The wind that swept through the streets of Belgrade in the late 1990s carried a bitterness that went deeper than the winter chill. It was a wind that tasted of wood smoke, diesel exhaust, and the heavy, gray scent of damp concrete. This was a city suspended in time, caught between the echoes of a shattered federation and the uncertain light of a new millennium. Along the banks of the Danube, the skeletons of old factories stood as silent monuments to an era that had vanished almost overnight. The iron gates were rusted shut, and the air around them felt thick, as if the silence itself had weight. In the residential blocks, the flickering of yellow streetlights cast long, shivering shadows across facades pockmarked by history. Life moved slowly here, retreating into the warmth of cramped kitchens and the dim, amber glow of corner cafes, where the steam from thick Turkish coffee rose in lazy, fragrant spirals. It was in these quiet corners, shielded from the biting air, that the first threads of a global shadow were woven. The men who sat in those cafes were not ordinary dreamers. They were men with hard, calloused hands and eyes that had seen the horizon of a dozen different battlefields. In the aftermath of the Yugoslav wars, the region was filled with soldiers who had no more wars to fight and intelligence officers whose secrets were no longer currency for the state. They were veterans of elite units, some from the shadowy paramilitary groups like the Tigers, others from the formal ranks of the Yugoslav army. They had been trained to move through the night without a sound, to read a landscape for its vulnerabilities, and to maintain absolute discipline under the most crushing pressure. When the peace finally arrived in 1999, it did not bring prosperity. Instead, it brought a crushing stillness. The military boots were tucked away in closets, but the mindset of the tactician remained. These men were accustomed to the rush of adrenaline and the cold clarity of a mission. To them, the transition from a soldier to a specialist in the underworld was not a leap, but a quiet, logical step into a different kind of darkness. Survival in the late 1990s meant mastering the art of the edge. As international sanctions strangled the economy, a vast, invisible network of smuggling began to pulse through the Balkans. It started with the basics of life: fuel, cigarettes, and sugar moving across borders in the dead of night. These were the training grounds for what would become the most sophisticated jewel thieves the world had ever known. The soldiers learned the secret geography of the mountains, the rhythm of the border patrols, and the price of a well-placed silence. They realized that the skills they used to bypass an embargo were the same skills needed to bypass a vault. In cities like Niš and Cetinje, the air was filled with a quiet desperation. Young men watched as their fathers' pensions evaporated into hyperinflation, leaving behind a vacuum that only the bold could fill. They didn't see themselves as common criminals. They saw themselves as survivors, ghosts of a collapsed empire who were taking back what the world had taken from them. The architecture of their operations began to take shape on low wooden tables covered in hand-drawn maps and cigarette ash. There was no single kingpin, no central headquarters where orders were barked into phones. Instead, the network was decentralized, a collection of independent cells bound together by shared history and mutual trust. They spoke a language born of the trenches and the barracks, a dialect of precision and brevity. One man might be a master of logistics, able to procure a high-speed vehicle or a forged passport with a single nod. Another might be a diminutive locksmith, a man whose fingers could read the tumblers of a safe like Braille. They treated a jewelry store not as a shop, but as a target of opportunity, a physical puzzle to be solved with military efficiency. They would spend months studying the rotation of security guards, the exact timing of the traffic lights on the escape route, and even the texture of the floor wax to ensure their boots wouldn't slip during a getaway. Every movement was choreographed, every second accounted for in their silent, internal stopwatches. By the turn of the century, these echoes from the Balkans were ready to resonate far beyond their borders. The collapse of the Soviet bloc had opened the gates, and the veterans were ready to walk through them. They carried with them a profound lack of fear, a psychological armor forged in the fires of civil conflict. To a man who has survived an artillery barrage, the high-pitched wail of a store alarm is nothing more than background noise. They looked toward the glittering capitals of the West, London, Paris, Tokyo, Geneva, not with awe, but with a cold, analytical hunger. They saw a world of luxury that was soft, complacent, and entirely unprepared for the level of tactical discipline they were about to unleash. In the quiet mountain villages of Montenegro and the crowded apartments of Belgrade, the blueprints were being folded into pockets. The shadows were lengthening, reaching out across the continent, preparing to strike with a speed that would leave the world gasping for air. The soldiers were no longer in the trenches. They were in the heart of the city, and the hunt was about to begin. By the early spring of 2004, the group had turned their eyes toward the neon-drenched horizon of Tokyo. The district of Ginza, a labyrinth of high-fashion boutiques and glass-fronted cathedrals of wealth, hummed with the quiet energy of extreme prosperity. It was a place where silence was expensive, and the air always smelled faintly of expensive leather and roasted green tea. On the morning of March 5th, a light, biting wind swept through the narrow side streets, rattling the signs of designer labels that hung like modern heraldry. Amidst the sea of dark suits and hurried commuters, the shadows were beginning to take shape. This was the stage for what would become known as the greatest robbery in the history of Japan, a performance of such chilling efficiency that the perpetrators seemed less like men and more like apparitions. They were not there to simply take, they were there to vanish. At the heart of their ambition lay a single, breathtaking object, the Comtesse de Vendôme necklace. Resting on a bed of dark velvet inside the boutique known as Le Suprédiamant Couture de Maquis, the piece was a masterwork of light and cold fire. It was composed of 116 diamonds, trailing like frozen droplets around a massive, 125-carat centerpiece that anchored the design with a weight that felt almost impossible. Valued at over $31 million, the necklace had been the boutique's crowning jewel since 1991. To the thieves, it was not merely wealth. It was the ultimate challenge of a high-security culture. They spent weeks observing the rhythmic pulse of the district, noting how the guards stood, how the shop assistants bowed, and how the electronic alarms flickered with a green, steady heartbeat in the dim light of the evening. The planning was a study in psychological camouflage. Alexandar and Dord, the primary actors in this silent drama, moved through the city in disguises that were as simple as they were effective. They wore synthetic wigs that shifted slightly in the breeze and large, dark sunglasses that obscured the intensity of their gaze. They were accompanied by Snezhana and Dorothy, women who managed the intricate logistics and kept watch with the patience of hunters. Their choice of a getaway vehicle was perhaps their most brilliant subversion of expectations. In a city famous for high-speed trains and congested traffic, they chose the humble bicycle. They knew that a car would be trapped in the suffocating embrace of Tokyo's gridlock, and a motorcycle would roar with a suspicious mechanical urgency. But a bicycle was a whisper. It could weave between pedestrians, slip through the tightest of alleys, and vanish into the flow of the city without leaving a trail of exhaust or sound. At exactly 11:45 in the morning, the two men stepped into the boutique. The atmosphere was hushed, the lighting soft and amber. One man carried a bag bearing the logo of a prestigious brand, a prop to signal status and intent. As the clerk stepped forward with a polite, practiced smile, the air suddenly changed. The man reached into his bag, not for a wallet, but for a canister of pepper spray. The acrid, stinging mist filled the small space in an instant, a sharp contrast to the delicate perfumes of the room. The clerk collapsed, gasping and disoriented, as the second man swung a heavy hammer. The sound of the glass shattering was not a crash, but a crystalline explosion, 1,000 tiny shards scattering like diamonds themselves across the floor. In less than 36 seconds, the Comtesse de Vendôme was gone, lifted from its velvet pedestal, and disappeared into the folds of a dark jacket. They stepped back out into the crisp March air, their hearts likely thundering against their ribs, yet their movements remained steady and calm. They moved toward their bicycles, which had been parked nearby with an air of mundane innocence. As the first sirens began to wail in the distance, a sound that usually signals the end of a crime, the thieves were already pedaling. They moved with a rhythmic, steady pace, cutting through the dense crowds of Ginza like shadows passing through a forest. They utilized the very density of Japan's most expensive district as their shield, turning the thousands of witnesses into a blur of useless information. By the time the police had established their perimeter and begun searching for a high-speed vehicle, the Ginza ghosts had already reached their safe house. The necklace, with its 116 stones, had effectively dissolved into the gray morning light, never to be seen in its original form again. The desert air of 2007 was heavy with the scent of jasmine and the lingering warmth of the sun as night descended over the city of Dubai. Inside the Wafi Mall, the atmosphere was one of cool, curated luxury. The architecture, inspired by the ancient majesty of Egypt, stood silent and grand under the vast glass pyramid of the atrium. Shoppers moved languidly over polished marble floors that reflected the soft glow of golden chandeliers, unaware that the stillness was about to be shattered. It was approximately 10 o'clock in the evening on the 15th of April, a time when the city usually hummed with the quiet vibrance of late-night commerce. The air-conditioned breeze carried the faint notes of soft music, mingling with the distant murmur of conversation. Everything seemed anchored in safety and opulence, a sanctuary of wealth protected by thick layers of security and the perceived untouchability of the Emirates. But outside, in the deepening shadows of the parking lot, two engines were idling with a low, predatory thrum. They were stolen machines, heavy and powerful, waiting for the signal to violate the sanctuary of the mall. The drivers sat in a focused, practiced silence, their hands gripped tight against leather steering wheels, their eyes fixed on the glass barriers that separated the ordinary world from the millions of dollars in diamonds waiting within the house of Graf. Suddenly, the peace of the evening was obliterated by the scream of tires against pavement. Two Audi S8 sedans, one as white as a sun-bleached bone and the other as black as the midnight sea, surged forward with a violent roar of horsepower. They didn't stop at the entrance. With a deafening explosion of sound, the vehicles lurched through the massive glass facade of the mall, turning the elegant doors into a million glittering shards that rained down like frozen diamonds. The impact was a physical wave, a concussive force that rattled the very bones of the building. The cars didn't stall. They surged onward, their tires screeching and spinning across the pristine marble walkways, leaving dark, rubbery scars on the stone. Shoppers and security guards froze in a state of pure, paralyzed shock as the vehicles hurtled toward their target. The sight was surreal, a cinematic nightmare unfolding in real time. The white car led the way, its headlights cutting through the mall's ambient glow like twin blades, while the black car followed in its wake, a shadow following a ghost. They navigated the wide corridors with an eerie, practiced precision, the engines echoing off the high ceilings like thunder trapped in a canyon. There was no hesitation, no frantic maneuvering, only the terrifying efficiency of a military strike. The cars came to a screeching halt directly in front of the House of Graf, the tires smoking as they bit into the stone. In a blur of motion, 8 men dressed in dark clothing and masks spilled out of the vehicles. They moved with a fluidity that betrayed years of training, a choreography of crime that was as graceful as it was terrifying. Some carried hammers, while others brandished weapons that looked chillingly real, though they would later be discovered to be clever imitations designed only to instill fear. The sound of heavy hammers striking reinforced glass filled the atrium, a rhythmic, metallic staccato that signaled the end of the store's defenses. Each swing was calculated, hitting the pressure points of the display cases until the thick glass buckled and surrendered. Inside those cases lay a king's ransom. Diamonds that had been formed deep within the earth over millions of years, now being swept into rough canvas bags by gloved hands. The thieves did not linger over the beauty of the stones. They did not marvel at the way the light danced within the facets of the necklaces and rings. To them, these were not treasures. They were simply high-value targets. They moved from case to case with a cold, mechanical speed, filling their bags with nearly $15 million worth of jewelry in a matter of seconds. The entire operation, from the moment the glass doors shattered to the moment the thieves climbed back into their idling cars, took less than 3 minutes. 170 seconds of absolute, calculated chaos. As the men piled back into the Audis, the bags of diamonds clattering against the floor mats, the drivers slammed the vehicles into reverse. They roared back out through the same gaping hole they had created, leaving behind a scene of devastation and disbelief. The air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and the fine dust of pulverized glass. On the street, they sped away into the labyrinthine roads of Dubai, disappearing before the first sirens could even be heard in the distance. They traveled to a prearranged location on Zabil Road, a stretch of pavement where the city's lights began to thin out. Here, the final act of the raid was to take place. The men stepped out of the stolen Audis, their movements still hurried but precise. They doused the interiors of the cars with gasoline, the pungent, oily scent filling the night air. With the strike of a single match, the vehicles were transformed into roaring pyres. The fire was meant to be the ultimate eraser, a wall of heat and chemical flame designed to consume every strand of hair, every flake of skin, and every fingerprint that might link the men to the heist. The flames climbed high into the night sky, casting long, flickering shadows across the desert sand. The thieves vanished into the darkness, switching to secondary getaway vehicles that had been waiting in the gloom. But in their haste, or perhaps due to the intense pressure of the moment, a small but critical error was made. In one of the burning Audis, the windows had been left tightly rolled up. Without a flow of oxygen to feed the core of the fire, the heat did not reach the temperatures required to achieve total incineration. The fire smoldered and choked, and while it damaged the interior, it failed to destroy everything. Deep within the crevices of the upholstery, microscopic traces of biological material survived the inferno. It was a tiny mistake, a single missed detail in an otherwise flawless execution, but it would eventually provide the thread that the authorities would use to unravel the mystery. As the cars burned, the world woke up to the news of the Waffy Mall raid. It was a headline that circled the globe within hours, a story of audacity that seemed to belong to a Hollywood script rather than a police report. The Middle East, often perceived as a fortress of safety, had been breached by a gang of specters who moved like soldiers and vanished like smoke. The international shockwaves were immediate. Interpol and local authorities realized they were not dealing with common criminals, but with a highly organized syndicate that viewed national borders as mere suggestions. This raid was the catalyst for what would become known as Project Pink Panthers, a global effort to track and dismantle the network of Balkan thieves who had now proven they could strike anywhere, at any time. The diamonds stolen that night, 43 pieces of exquisite craftsmanship, were gone, likely already in the hands of fences who would break them down or smuggle them into the black markets of Europe and Asia. Back at the mall, the silence returned, but it was a heavy, haunted kind of quiet. The marble floors were cleaned, the glass was replaced, and the House of Graph eventually reopened its doors, but the memory of those 3 minutes lingered in the air like a ghost. The thieves had left more than just broken glass. They had left a message of vulnerability. As the investigation began to peer into the ashes of the Audis, the investigators found themselves staring into a void, searching for the faces behind the masks. They were looking for men who had mastered the art of being invisible, men who understood that in the world of high-stakes crime, the most valuable tool is not a gun or a car, but the ability to strike with such speed that the world doesn't even have time to blink. The quiet halls of the Interpol General Secretariat in Lyon, France, felt heavy with the weight of unseen data. In July of 2007, the air within these walls shifted. It was no longer just a repository for fragmented reports from disparate nations. It became the heart of a dedicated operation known as Project Pink Panthers. Imagine a room where the walls are lined with high-resolution screens, and the hum of powerful servers provides a constant, low-frequency vibration beneath the floorboards. Here, the investigation transformed from a series of frantic local responses into a slow, methodical siege. The investigators worked in a space that smelled faintly of ozone and stale coffee, their eyes tracing the invisible threads of a web that spanned more than 20 different countries. They were not looking for ghosts anymore. They were looking for patterns. Every smash and grab, every stolen Audi, and every discarded cigarette butt was now being funneled into a single, centralized digital brain. The silence in the office was deceptive, for it masked an unprecedented global coordination, where analysts from Japan, Switzerland, and the United Arab Emirates spoke in the quiet, urgent tones of people who finally saw the shape of their enemy. Deep within the forensic laboratories, the light was clinical and unforgiving, reflecting off the polished stainless steel of the workbenches. This was where the impenetrable facade began to show its first microscopic cracks. Forensic scientists, wearing double layers of nitrile gloves that clicked softly against glass vials, were engaged in a form of modern alchemy. They were extracting genetic ghosts from the most mundane objects. A single strand of hair found in a getaway car in Tokyo, or the faint, translucent oils of a fingerprint left on a window ledge in Geneva, became the keys to a kingdom. In these quiet hours, a breakthrough arrived not with a shout, but with a soft chime from a computer screen. A DNA profile taken from a discarded glove in one country perfectly matched a sample from a robbery 5 years prior in another. This genetic signature acted like a beacon, illuminating the movement of individuals across borders that they had previously crossed with total anonymity. The investigators watched as names began to attach themselves to these biological markers, transforming the myth of the Pink Panthers into a list of living, breathing men with histories, families, and shadows of their own. The search then moved to the winding, cobblestone streets of Paris, specifically the Pigalle district, where the scent of rain on old stone and the neon glow of theater signs created a cinematic backdrop for the next act. In May of 2009, the air was cool and damp. Inside a discreet, unremarkable hotel, the ticking of a bedside clock was the only sound in a small room. Two men, Zoran Kostic and Nikola Ivanovic, believed they were safe within the anonymity of the city. They moved with the easy confidence of those who had outrun the law for a decade. But outside, the shadows were moving. Officers from the Brigade de Repression du Banditisme watched from parked cars, their breaths fogging the windows as they waited for the perfect moment. The arrest was not a chaotic scene of gunfire, but a swift, surgical strike that happened in the hushed corridors of the hotel. When the police finally closed in, they found more than just the men. They found a detailed list of luxury watches, a ledger of their crimes that smelled of ink and expensive paper. The myth was being dismantled, one room at a time, beneath the gray, drizzly skies of the French capital. While Paris felt like a noir film, Monaco offered a more surreal setting for the organization's unraveling. In October of 2008, the sun-drenched streets of Monte Carlo, usually filled with the roar of supercars and the scent of expensive perfume, became the site of a bizarre stroke of fate. Imagine the bright, blinding reflection of the Mediterranean Sea against the white stone of the casinos. A man named Dusko Poznan was walking near the Place du Casino, his mind likely on a future heist, when the mundane reality of a car accident interrupted his plans. He was struck by a vehicle, a moment of physical vulnerability that no amount of criminal planning could have prevented. As he lay in a hospital bed, the antiseptic smell of the ward filling his senses, a local police officer walked in. The officer was not there for an interrogation, but to take a simple statement. However, this officer had spent hours staring at Interpol posters, memorizing the sharp angles of the faces belonging to the world's most wanted jewel thieves. In the quiet, sterile light of the hospital room, the officer looked at the man in the bed and saw the face of a panther. The realization hung in the air, heavy and silent, as the carefully constructed life of a high-stakes fugitive came to an abrupt, quiet end. The arrest in Monaco acted as a catalyst, a signal to the rest of the world that the Pink Panthers were not invincible. The slow, methodical work of over 20 nations was finally bearing fruit. In high-security police stations from Belgrade to Rome, investigators began to share their findings with a ferocity that matched the gang's own speed. They utilized sophisticated software to visualize the criminal network, a digital spider web where every node represented a person and every line represented a crime. They saw how the gang functioned like a corporation, with recruiters, logistics experts, and foot soldiers. The forensic evidence continued to pile up, a mountain of DNA and fingerprints that stripped away the glamour of the heists. Each arrest in Paris or Monaco was a thread pulled from a finely woven tapestry, and as more threads were removed, the entire image began to fray. The organization that had once seemed like a phantom was now being viewed under the harsh, unwavering light of international law enforcement. The shadow of Interpol was no longer a distant threat. It was a cold, encroaching reality that was slowly turning the lights out on the most successful jewel thieves the world had ever known. The echoes of shattering glass and the roar of high-performance engines have long since faded into the salt-heavy air of the Adriatic coast. In the quiet that followed the storm of the 1990s and the early 2000s, we are left to sift through the remnants of a criminal empire that was as brilliant and cold as the stones it pursued. The Pink Panthers, once a name that sent shivers through the boardrooms of New Bond Street and the Ginza district, have become a ghost story told in the low light of Balkan coffee houses. It is a story of $500 million, perhaps as much as $1 billion, in gems and precious metals that simply vanished into the ether. Imagine, if you will, the sheer volume of that wealth. Hundreds upon hundreds of carats of compressed light, hidden in the floorboards of modest apartments in Belgrade, or perhaps buried beneath the roots of ancient olive trees in the Montenegrin mountains. These stones do not rot. They do not fade. They wait in the darkness, indifferent to the hands that snatched them or the sirens that chased them across international borders. The legacy of the network is not found in a central headquarters or a master ledger, for no such things exist. Instead, it is scattered across 1,000 quiet lives, fragmented like a diamond struck by a hammer at the perfect angle. Consider the fate of the stones themselves. Many of the most famous pieces, like the Comtesse de Vendôme necklace with its 116 flawless diamonds, have never been seen again. They were likely broken down within hours of the heist, their unique facets ground away or their settings melted into anonymous puddles of gold. This is the tragic alchemy of the jewel thief, to take something of singular beauty and transform it into common currency. There is a melancholy in that disappearance. Somewhere, perhaps in a bustling market in a distant city, a woman wears a small, brilliant stud in her ear, never knowing that its crystal heart once sat in a tiara that graced the neck of a countess or occupied the center of a glass case in a Tokyo vault. The money, too, has been absorbed into the landscape. In the small towns of the Balkans, like Cetinje, the air is thick with the smell of strong espresso and wood smoke. You might see a man sitting at a scarred wooden table, his hands rough from years of manual labor or perhaps from the grip of a steering wheel. He drinks his coffee slowly, watching the mist roll off the black mountains. To his neighbors, he is just a man who came home after years of working abroad. They do not ask where the money for his house came from, nor why he possesses a certain quiet, military discipline in his movements. In these towns, silence is a respected currency, and the secret of a 20-year-old heist is a heavy stone to carry in one's pocket. The world that allowed the Pink Panthers to thrive has changed irrevocably. The porous borders of the post-war Balkans have tightened, and the technology of surveillance has moved from the grainy shadows of closed-circuit television to the inescapable gaze of artificial intelligence and facial recognition. The era of the 90-second smash and grab is over, replaced by a digital landscape where even a single microscopic diamond can be tracked via blockchain from the mine to the finger. The network, which once boasted as many as 800 associates, has decentralized into a phantom. Some members are in prison, counting the days in cells across Switzerland, France, and Japan. Others have simply stopped. They have realized that the thrill of the chase is a young person's game, and that the weight of a guilty conscience is far heavier than any bag of loot. There is a certain irony in their nickname. They were named for a comedy, but their reality was born from the harsh, gray rubble of a collapsing country. They were men and women who used the skills of war to navigate the cathedrals of luxury, while they prided themselves on being gentlemen thieves, noting that in over 20 years of activity, only one life was ever lost. They remain a reminder of a fractured time. The romanticism of their heists is a thin veneer over a foundation of displacement and desperation. As we look back on the fragments of this story, we see that the true mystery isn't just where the diamonds went, but what they cost. The peace of mind of a jewelry clerk in Dubai, the sleep of a security guard in London, the safety of a street in Paris, all these were traded for the flash of a stone. Now, the network is a memory, its members fading into the gray tapestry of the history books. The unrecovered millions are nothing more than a ghost in the financial system, a void where treasure used to be. The grand heists have ceased, the speedboats have been docked, and the wigs and masks have been discarded. What remains is only the silence of the stones themselves, resting in the dark, forever out of reach. The story of the Pink Panthers is a closed circle, a glittering loop that has finally come to its end. The case rests now. Let the details fade. You are safe. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and have a good night. Sleep well.